I'm Paul Edwards. I'm the self-published author of the Mourner's Woods book series, and first and foremost, a monster kid. Tonight, I want to talk about why Gabara lost when he fought Minya in All Monsters Attack, released in some markets as Godzilla's Revenge. In order to fully understand this movie, you have to be aware of the Godzilla movies that had come before. Okay? 9 successful Godzilla movies were made before 1968. And in 1968, the studio decided that the series had run its course and they were going to make one final Godzilla movie, Destroy All Monsters. Destroy All Monsters featured as many giant monsters from previous films as they could possibly salvage the costumes for. And the story was that aliens had taken mind control of all the Earth's monsters and were sending them to destroy our cities. And eventually the monsters are able to rebel and fight back. So tons of monsters appeared in Destroy All Monsters. Even if they'd been killed in previous movies, didn't matter. They were in here anyway. And they were all gathered on an island called Monster Island. This is where the Godzilla franchise first had the idea of an island in the South Seas that Godzilla ruled, where all the giant monsters lived. So Destroy All Monsters was a big hit. In fact, it did so well that Toho Studios changed their minds about making it the last one. It made so much money that they couldn't resist cranking another one out. The creative team behind the Godzilla franchise were sort of mystified about what they could do next, because in their minds, Destroy All Monsters had been the huge spectacle finish to the series, and they really didn't know how they were going to top that. So they didn't try. Instead, they took a completely different direction with the next film, Godzilla's Revenge. They targeted it in a way towards younger children and told the story of a latchkey kid, an inner city boy named Ichiro, who loves monsters. And he's lonesome and he's bullied by the mean kids in the neighborhood. And when he's at home alone, he daydreams. He has escapist daydreams that he's on Monster Island making friends with Minya, the son of Godzilla, and witnessing Godzilla battling other monsters on the island. An interesting thing about this premise is that it doesn't require any of the previous Godzilla movies to be real in order for this story to happen. In other words, Ichiro could be living in a world where the Godzilla movies are just movies, and Ichiro is just a kid like all the rest of us who loved Godzilla movies and thought about the monsters a lot, and this is a story that's happening to him as he's daydreaming about fictitious monsters from the movies. Or it could equally be that all the other movies are canon to this. That's up to you. But the script makes it vague either way. So Ichiro, in real life, he's bullied by a mean kid named Gabara. So in his fantasy daydreams, he daydreams that Minya, the relatively small son of Godzilla, is being bullied by a monster on Monster Island named Gabara. Sort of a bipedal frog, if you could imagine that. And Gabara is just a jerk. He's just real mean. He picks on Minya for no reason other than to pick on him. He's not trying to eat him or anything. He just likes slapping him around. And Minya is terrorized by Gabara, just like Ichiro is terrorized by the real little boy, Gabara. Also, in the neighborhood, there are some criminals who are hiding out from the law, and accidentally Ichiro becomes a potential witness to where they're hiding out, so the criminals end up kidnapping Ichiro. So Ichiro now has a couple of challenges ahead of him. He has to fight back against these criminals that have kidnapped him, and he has to fight back against Gabara the bully and put him in his place. How does he do this? Well, it all goes back to his Monster Island fantasy. On Monster Island, he's hanging out with Minya, and he's watching Godzilla battle other monsters, courtesy of stock footage from the past few Godzilla films. And he also is witness to Minya being chased around the island by this bully monster, Gabara. But with Ichiro's help, Minya finally builds up the confidence to stand his ground and fight back against Gabara. And Gabara is far bigger than Minya, far stronger. It's not a question of being stronger than Gabara, because Minya is never going to do that. But Minya can still be more clever than Gabara. And based on a suggestion from Ichiro, Minya finds a clever way to outwit Gabara and knock Gabara over. And he has basically won his fight against Gabara. Now there's a second round that comes up after this, because Godzilla shows up and he's very proud of Minya for having beaten his enemy. And then Gabara gets up again and this time challenges Godzilla. And so we see Godzilla fight Gabara, because after all, the franchise is Godzilla. They have to show Godzilla beating this new bad monster. So with the victory won by Minya in his daydreams, Ichiro is inspired to fight back against the kidnappers who have captured him, and to fight back against Gabara the bully. And his whole life has changed at the end of this. The bully now respects him, and the mean kids in the neighborhood all invite him into their friend group. And it's a happy ending for Ichiro. I'm not sure why Ichiro would want to be friends with a whole bunch of mean kids, but I guess that's a separate issue. So now we come to the real operative question. Why Gabara lost when he fought against Minya? The easy answer is because he's imaginary. But by that standard, you'd have to say that this version of Minya was also imaginary, so that really doesn't help you. Gabara lost because in Ichiro's mind, he was using the monster Gabara as a stand-in for the enemies in his life, and he was using Minya as a stand-in for himself. And as Ichiro processed these thoughts, he was able to get to a point where he developed confidence in himself and was able to stand up, at least in his own mind, was able to stand up and defy the bullies. He didn't have to be bigger than them. He didn't have to be strong enough to beat them. He just had to be strong enough to stand up against them. And with that example in his mind, Ichiro was able to do exactly that in the real world. He had the determination to stand up to the two criminals who had kidnapped him, and the determination to stand up to the bully. It's interesting because not only was Ichiro no stronger than any of these people, he was weaker than all of them, even Gabara, the other little boy. It wasn't strength that let Ichiro win, not physical strength. It was strength of character, determination. So the reason why Gabara the monster won is that monsters can be defeated when we stand up to them, and that's what happened in this little boy's mind. And based on that image, that archetype, he was able to let exactly that happen in the real world. My first published novel, Mourner's Woods, has an exchange in it that is very reminiscent of this film, where the bullied girl in school is talking to the big brute who's always bullying her and terrorizing her. And she's explaining to him that the fact that snakes eat mice is really something that shouldn't have to happen, because a mouse can kill a snake. And the bully's like, what are you talking about? A mouse can kill a snake? That's ridiculous. And Dinah, the bullied girl, explains, no, it's completely true. Mouse teeth are long enough and sharp enough so that most kinds of snakes, common kinds of snakes anyway, that would approach the mouse to eat it, if the mouse could just be brave for 1 second and bite the snake's head, its teeth are long enough that it would easily pierce the snake's thin skull and penetrate its brain, and the snake would just drop dead instantly. So if the mouse, even though the snake is bigger and looks scary, if the mouse could just be brave for just a second, brave enough to stand its ground and chomp the snake's head, the mouse could kill the snake, even though it is a weaker animal. And the bully processes this for a minute, and he says, well, then really, when the mouse gets eaten, it's the mouse's fault because he's not standing up for himself, which is exactly how bullies think. And of course, if you have read Mourner's Woods, you will not feel too bad for Dinah, because we know that this is exactly what she's going to do on Halloween night when she's out in the forest being chased around by the mean kids in school who plan to sacrifice her to an internet monster. She has every intention of being the mouse who stood up for itself and was able to kill the larger and scarier snake. You really should check out my first published novel, Mourner's Woods, on Amazon.com. But that's why Gabara lost, because Ichiro was able to stand up against this larger, scarier bully. He didn't have to be stronger than it, he just had to stand up for himself. Gabara never made a comeback in any other Godzilla movie, which is interesting to me because almost every monster that's been used in a Godzilla film has returned in some form in later films, but never Gabara. And I can't help but wonder if that is a reflection of the fact that Gabara, the monster Gabara, only ever existed in Ichiro's mind. Interestingly, this is one of the most hated Godzilla movies. This and Godzilla vs. Megalon, which I also gave a positive review to. You can find that video on my channel, and there's a very good reason why. But mostly I find that this movie is hated by younger viewers and enjoyed much more by older viewers. I believe, this is just my guess, I believe the reason for this is that younger viewers can see clearly that the movie is targeting children with its message, and they feel that this makes the movie childish and it's not as mature as the previous Godzilla movies where, you know, Godzilla was trampling cities and the situation was very dire. So I think that's why younger children don't like it, because they don't, well, tend not to like it, because they don't appreciate being talked down to. But I believe that older viewers like this film more because they see the entire Godzilla franchise as childish. And it's because they see the entire franchise as childish that they don't especially care that this movie is aimed more directly towards kids. And they're able to appreciate the new, different angle that this film takes. So that's my best guess as to why a lot of people do not like Godzilla's Revenge. And I don't think that it's a fair criticism, because it is one of the better Showa era films. And you don't have to take my word for it. You know whose word you can take for it? Ishiro Honda, the director of the classic Godzilla movies, including the original 1954 Godzilla. Ishiro Honda himself said that this film was one of the better Godzilla films. So you can fight me in the comments, but you're also fighting Ishiro Honda, the director of the original Godzilla and of this. There is a very legitimate criticism of this movie, though, and that is the shameless use of recycled footage from previous Godzilla movies. Basically, any Godzilla scene that took place on an island, they recycled into this film, including Godzilla's fight against the gigantic spider Kumonga, dubbed in some markets as Spiga, the fight against the Kamacuras, the fight against Ibira, the sea monster, and the fight against the jet fighters, where they have a completely awesome shot as one of the jet fighters is flying by Godzilla, and Godzilla snatches the fighter out of midair in one hand and then smashes it with the other hand, which would require unbelievable power, and of course only our hero Godzilla could do it. So that's a legitimate criticism of this film. There's way, way too much recycled footage. I almost suspect that Toho was actually taking a cue from their rivals, Dai, the studio that made the Gabara films, which continually used shameless amounts of footage from previous films in order to pad out the runtime of the current film. But there were special effects scenes that were created just for Godzilla's Revenge. Everything with Gabara in it was all original footage. And strangely enough, if you're familiar with this film, you might remember the scene where Godzilla is teaching Minya to use his atomic fire breath. And it's very, very much like a scene in Son of Godzilla. And you might think, because there's so much stock footage recycled in this movie, you might think that this is the clip from Son of Godzilla, but it's actually not. Look closely next time you watch this movie. Look at the Godzilla costume. It's not the Son of Godzilla costume. It's the costume from Destroy All Monsters, the previous film. They actually recreated, down to the most minute detail, they recreated the scene where Godzilla teaches Minya how to use his atomic fire breath. I don't know why they felt compelled to do that when they could have either used the original scene, because they were using a whole lot of recycled footage anyway, or shot something different. But for whatever reason, they remade and reconstructed the scene they had done from Son of Godzilla, and that is original footage. So there you have it. That's why Gabara lost. Thanks for spending some time with me on my continuing running gag of why Monster lost. And if you're not in on the joke, go back and watch some of the previous videos and you'll understand the explanation for this format. And until then, I'll see you in Mourner's Woods.